Hey, Earthlings! Welcome to it's a kind of replacement for the time tunnel. So we're going to call it a time tunnel special or a time tunnel kind of, in the sense that we will be looking at some of the history of the movement, the kind of stuff that you'll be familiar with, I'm sure. But it's not going to be a normal kind of time tunnel in that sense. Well, let's get on with it, and then we'll explain what we're going to be doing. So welcome to another Time Tunnel special. Well, it's Andy Atkinson. Hello, young man.
Hi, you all right?
How are you doing?
Again.
So let's have a look who's in so far. Michael made it very early. He said he's back to winning ways. So everybody who feels competitive with Michael,
I think that Michael was sat in this chat from yesterday after nursing the defeat to Graham. Wasn't going to.
Oh, is that what it was? Yeah, still kind of licking his wounds, you say, don't you? Yeah. So and Terry was
got to give it him.
Terry was a second. Vegan Pundit was third. Cindy post-mortem. Who else have we got? Bianca. Colleen is in the house. I think that's everybody who's mentioned themselves in the chat so far. So welcome along. So I suppose we better explain what we're doing then. We look at this phenomena called animals only veganism. So we're looking for at the case for it. And kind of where it comes from, what it says, what are the worries that it raises, if any. And so that's kind of basically where we are. I tend to think that, I don't know how you think about this, Andy, but I tend to think there might be a strong version of it and a softer version, in the sense that the strong version says that there is no place for concerns about humans whatsoever in the movement. There's a strict dividing line, stay in your own lane, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then there is a softer version which says that okay, well, humans do get a benefit, but that's like an add-on, right? Now,
Yeah.
That one to me is quite interesting, because if that is translated to something like animals first, then I think we can probably go a long way to agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I would agree with what you're saying. I mean, sometimes people seem to hold a kind of mixture of both positions, i.e. humans are absolutely not part of it. But if it was that way in the future, then it would just be like a natural offshoot. You know, they will hold both positions. But yeah, more or less, it's a strong version and a slightly lighter one.
Slightly lighter one, yeah. Okay, so let me bring up the PowerPoint. So these are the main arguments that we're aware of. There's one more coming up, which I'll flash up now. In fact, animals deserve their own movement, which I think is probably the strongest argument for this position, right? So if anybody in the chat, when we go through these, if we miss anything, let us know, and then we can put it up on the screen. Again, don't be kind of wary about chatting away, and because you won't have to pay to get your opinions put on the screen, so don't kind of worry about that one. And in terms of those watching outside of YouTube, then the best way to see the comments is if you go to Andy's YouTube, which is called Not Your Mum.
Not Your Milk. Yeah, Not Your Mum. Not Your Milk.
Yeah, or my one. That's the best way. If you do comment on Facebook, we will be able to see it, and we'll be able to respond to it. But you won't be able to see everybody else's comments. Essentially, that's basically the kind of difference there. Okay, so this is a very common part of the animals only claims making, which is that some people are adding humans into the animal movement and making it all about them. So So I'm just going to run through these before we actually start discussing it, if that's okay, Andy. So,
Yeah, that's fine.
So adding humans in and making it all about them is one suggestion. Anyone who includes humans focuses only on humans. That's another thing. Now, most of these ones, not all, come from a conversation I've had recently with people who take this animals only kind of line, if you like. So these are genuine points that are being made to us. So it's not just kind of made up, if you like. And so I was asked that question: why do you have a problem with it being about non-human animals? And so that's often put to people who suggest that the movement is rather wider. Yes, there are. So this is the add-on thing. Yes, there are benefits to humans, but that's just the result of being a civilized human and not the main reason for the cause. Okay. So I think on that one, Andy, we can probably, meet that one halfway at least, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The last part of that sentence is absolutely my feelings, and I'm sure that they're yours as well. I mean, it brings up an interesting point that although this is the accusation, neither of us, as far as I'm aware, I never have spoken to someone who prioritizes these human issues and pushes the non-human issues to the back burner, so to speak. I've never come across anyone that's done that. And every time I've ever asked for evidence of a group or whoever does that, you never get any. So,
no,
yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody, even if you include humanity, has still got the non-human animals as their focus. I don't think anyone ever moves them from that priority position. I don't think that they ever stop being the focus in anyone's view, regardless of how much they include afterwards. I don't think anyone changes the focus. I've never heard that alleged, only by these people that make the sort of phantom statement. I've never seen any of these people. I've never seen any evidence of this opinion held by anyone ever.
Well, it'd be interesting to see if anybody in the chat, has.
Yeah, and please do. If you've come across people who do literally say no, the non-human animals are not important, we've got to talk about this instead. Yeah, but I've never come across one of those people. No.
It's a kind of diversion thing that some people will claim that that people in the movement are being bullied to do human rights issues rather than animal rights issues, and we ask for evidence of that, and they don't seem to. It doesn't materialize. That's essentially what we're saying for the moment. That's why I have a problem with it being about humans too, because the message to stop exploiting and killing animals is lost. If you make this movement about humans too, that will be the only motivation and focus, and you won't get a shift in people's minds to change the view that they are superior to other animals. Why don't you understand that other animals are the most exploited beings on the planet? And the reason for that is human supremacy. Well, of course, that's a kind of thing that we say all the time. So my response to this was, well, I do understand that. In fact, that was the opening statement of a reply to me.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it would be a case of who doesn't understand that, honestly. I think even the non-vegans understand that. They're just immune to it, so to speak. I don't think that is really argued, that point, is it? You can watch a kid's cartoon and it will talk about how man's destroyed the planet, for example. I think that's fairly sort of a common belief that most people know and hold. Yeah.
Yeah, I think most people, if you talk about numerically, most people would accept that other animals are exploited the most. So those people who use phrases like the animal holocaust, and they're not referring to the Holocaust, which is problematic, but that's their position. They would say that we're not actually comparing it to the human or any of the human Holocaust, and particularly not the Holocaust, because those ones were very small compared with the animal one. And so I think that is kind of accepted within the general kind of discourse, I think. And just again, that's the kind of strongest idea in my view. Now, I mean, I think the answer to that is that they've got one when we consider the focus the scope of the movement, and I think the thing to emphasize here is the strength of the focus. There's always this fear that the focus is being damaged or reduced or threatened by including anything else. So it's almost as though the scope might kind of leach into the focus and dilute it and all this kind of stuff. Now, there's absolutely no evidence that that's ever happened. I mean, if we look at our movement, what do we talk about? You know, the vast majority of things we talk about are our relations with other animals being the focus. So, in some senses, I always say, as a response to this, well, look, the other animals do have their own movement, and it's called the vegan movement. You know, so you know, I sometimes think that the fears of animals only people are unfounded, in the sense that they seem quite worried for the movement by the idea of bringing humans in. So that's the first point, adding humans in. Now, there's
I mean, I'm sure just whilst we're there, I'm sure if that was the case, okay, and there was people out there who were encouraging the non-human animals to be pushed to the back, and we should be prioritizing this, and there was focus groups being set up and all that sort of stuff, and the literature or the memes that were being put out were all of that sort of stuff, then I would be in agreement that that's not the focus. Like, even if that was happening, if someone said, here's a group, by the way, that are doing what you're talking about that you haven't seen before, I wouldn't be in agreement with them. I think that's the key point here, because the focus is the focus for a reason. And no, I don't think anyone is questioning that. So if you did come across people that were doing as alleged, I wouldn't be in agreement with them. They don't hold the same position necessarily as anyone else. Like, that's not something that I support, because the focus is the focus always. I think that it's really important to lay that down, that no matter what is kind of accused, that position, even if it does exist, like I said, I've never seen any evidence of it, but if it did exist, I wouldn't hold it.
No, and so I mean that kind of addresses the second point directly, because the scope of veganism does include human concerns. I mean, it doesn't say that every vegan needs to be a member of Amnesty International. That's not what's being said, right? But there's no evidence that because of that fact that humans are part of the scope, that the focus has switched to humans. There's absolutely no evidence. You know, there are some claims sometimes. Let's just have a look at. There's a couple of things. Vegan Bohemians and great to wake up to vegans. Love the live shows. Well, some people might think that is a bit of a nightmare, but thank you for that.
So, yeah, I wonder where they are. I suppose it must be America way.
Colleen is asking this: do you think some animals-only criticisms arise out of a fear of precious resources being diverted? They don't tend to talk about resources, do they?
No.
So I'm not quite sure about that one. I mean, I think it's resources as in time, I think, and in terms of what people.
Yeah, I mean, normally the allegation is potentially that. I suppose you could argue that it's resources, if you're talking about like energy and time in that sense. But yeah, usually the argument is if you include humans, you spend all your time talking about humans, and therefore the focus gets ignored for the scope. Essentially, that's the allegation. So I suppose you could look at it that way, but like I said, I've never seen any evidence of it. I've never seen this happen. I've never seen any group do this. I've never seen anyone do it and talk about it or mention it or anything else. It's just alleged.
Well, okay. Say we're talking about the Animal Rights March. I'm saying that with a bit of a smirk on my face at the moment. The one that's coming up that was Surge and now Animal Rising, right?
Yeah.
Is it being suggested that there is pressure that 50% of those people go and do something to do with human rights? Because again, if that's a suggestion, I've never ever known that. I do know there's a claim arising. One of the main props.
I think though, just before you move on, I think that brings up a really interesting point, though, that one of the criticisms, without going into that too much, but one of the criticisms of Animal Rising sort of being hosting that march is that it's no longer an animal rights march, that it's now encompassing all and nature. So you could actually say, I mean, all of the people that are classed as these prioritizing humans are arguing that it's been changed from an animal rights march. So surely, that's counter to the claim that they don't care. Surely they'd be in support of this all-inclusiveness, but actually they're like, this is an animal rights march. It should stay an animal rights march, which shows where the focus always is. Because that would be perfect for them to go, oh, yeah, we want this because we're trying to divert as much as possible. No, they're not trying to do that. They're trying to keep it as an animal rights march, which really speaks about where they know the focus is. Like I said, I've never seen anyone not know where the focus is, even if they are very, very inclusive of many, many other factors. Let's say they're really interested in the environment and climate, and that's their subject that they know the most about. They still know that the focus is the animals. Yeah.
Yeah, because in some weird way, Animal Rising could say to the people objecting, "Well, we're just including parts of the scope of veganism."
Yeah, they absolutely. If that's how they tried to, it would go down much better with the vegans. Said, although actually looking at it, I'm not sure. But yeah, it would certainly go down better with some people if that's how they worded it and said that's what they're trying to do. But yeah, it would. Yeah, it would, because it would show an understanding of the actual philosophy for a start, as opposed to being scared to use it, which is kind of the portrayal you get right now.
Okay, what I was saying was that one of the main planks of this position revolves around what happened with the George Floyd case.
Yeah,
and it's claimed that at that time, a small group of people was able to completely, to the extent that the majority of people in the animal rights movement were silent, and that they went along with the thing that you've got to support this movement that arisen out of the killing of George Floyd, right? And now the suggestion is that that's a shift now, and the majority are starting to find their voice, and that they can no longer be dominated as much as it was the case back then. But we've done some canvassing, people like Ronnie and all the people that we know, and we don't know anybody that was terrified or even pressurized.
No.
In that way. So you mentioned this is a tricky one, because you mentioned the phantom thing, and like it does seem that a lot of the fears of the animals only people are unfounded. There's nothing for them to be fearful of, and yet they're persistently fearful. It's weird to me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more along the lines of paranoia, isn't it? It's almost like the fear of what might happen, as opposed to ignoring some of the things that are happening right now.
Yeah. In terms of the first item, I always find that deeply ironic, because the allegation is that people are trying to move human issues in, whereas actually what's going on is that some people are trying to take human issues out. So it's not as though there are some human rights people imposing human issues on the animal movement in order to dilute the message. It's that those human concerns, as part of the scope, were always there, and those are being trying to be taken out. And so, for some reason, again, we're back to the uncertainty that the focus will remain the focus, and all the evidence suggests that it always has done. And the fear is that the scope will take over, and there's no evidence that that's ever happened either. And so I always find that quite interesting. Any human change, a byproduct add-on thing? I mean, I think we can talk about that when we get through to the slides, because I suppose you could, if you were to do a particular interpretation of some of the writings that we're going to look at, you could make that case that they were saying that. I think it would be very uncharitable if you did, personally.
Yeah, and it would ignore some of the things that came after, and it would also ignore our now better understanding of how corrupt the world is, and knowing full well that potentially, let's just say, we no longer exploit pigs, cows, chickens, sheep anymore. Children are still going to starve. Children are still going to be trafficked. We know these things go on, and we know how they go on, and they're not connected to the exploitation of non-human animals. So if these things aren't all connected, and that was never the plan, I would propose that they should be, because we're trying to end oppression of all. Or that's the idea here. So if we moved it from one and didn't, but personally, before we move on, I'd like to ask the chat or whatever. When we say the word animals, do you automatically have a distinction in your brain that says humans here, all non-human animals there, or does animals mean all of us together? Because personally, and they may well just be my personal thoughts on this, the idea of having two separate things is just speciesist. Surely the idea going forward is that we are all animals. There is no difference. To go to the second from last one, the superiority comes from thinking we're different. The superiority comes from we are human beings and everyone else isn't. That's where the superiority comes from. If we considered ourselves all animals, you've dropped that straight away, and there's your equality in one word. From my personal view, anyway.
Yeah, well, I know sociologically that there's pushback, usually from non-vegans, to the idea, first of all, that we're animals, second, that we're apes, and third, that we're mammals. A lot of humans just don't like that and will actually deny it straight off as well. And so that's really kind of interesting part of it.
Yeah.
There's Graham. I'm going to lower my voice because Graham's got a migraine, apparently. Hi, Graham. Humans are animals, mammals, mammalia, great apes. Yeah, you see, again, a lot of humans hate all that.
Yeah, but a lot of that comes from religion, right? Like that's the problem. Yeah,
that's right. And so so it's interesting, but I think you were saying, Andy, that there might be some elements of this resistance even within the movement, right?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't quite understand that. You'd have thought that if you gained a animal rights understanding of things and a vegan philosophy understanding of things, you would understand that we are. I mean, like the vegan pioneers talked about separation of calves and cows and the distress that caused, and the maternal bond, and all this kind of stuff between mammals. I mean, they talked about that, from the late 1940s. I mean, these kind of arguments that we present to people. Oh, do you know that? I mean, that started in the 1940s.
Yeah.
It's just that it's usually the general population who are resistant to it. Right. Now, what do you think about what I've kind of boldly described this as perhaps the strongest argument? This kind of stay in your lane, social movements. There's no linkage with social movements. They're all kind of separate entities, right? And so there's no kind of leeching in terms of your concerns are my concerns and these kind of things. So things like Steve Best's idea of alliance politics can only work is if you stay in your own box. And you might then say, okay, for a limited period of time and for a particular reason, we'll come into alliance with you for a while, right? But we will maintain our identity, right? And so I'm not sure that this fear is warranted either, Andy, because it's kind of, well, okay, the animals do have their own movement. It's just that it has a scope. Yeah. My argument there would be that all movements could benefit with having a scope. So if you had the feminist movement, they've obviously got a focus. You've got the anti-racist movement, they've obviously got a focus. But the scope should be other justice-based issues which are connected, because we don't have to use the dread I word here. You can use concepts like the logic of domination, or you can use David Nybert's idea of the entanglements of oppression and liberation.
Yeah,
and we'll see Donald Watson said something very, very similar to that, which is coming up, which is that everything is connected and we're not going to get one without the other. That type of art.
Yeah, I mean, if you took the feminism movement as your example there, so obviously their focus remains the same, but they just say incorporated the dairy industry into their scope. They'd probably, think of how common people would accept that. They're not taking anything away from the priority. They're not taking anything away from what they're actually fighting for. They're just saying, oh, by the way, if we push towards this would actually support what we're trying to achieve for the female of the species, so to speak. Like, you could introduce it in that way. Yeah, it would never take the focus away, but it could be incorporated into the scope, which is actually what a lot of people encourage feminists to do already, to encourage the whole dairy practice of separating mother from calf and the maternal instinct. That should already be part of their scope, right? That, like, you could make that argument, and that's all anyone would be suggesting. They wouldn't be saying stop talking about human rights, you now have to talk about cows, which would probably be the allegation, but it wouldn't be what they were actually trying to do, which is just the reverse of us. Nothing is taking any focus away from the focus. The scope can keep growing, but it never changes the focus. The focus is always the focus, which is why it's called the focus. I mean, I think it's such a key point that you've just made. The reason that there is a focus and a scope is because there is a focus and a scope. Like, the words sum it up perfectly. Like, it's pretty simple stuff.
Yeah,
and I just think if it was organized. Yeah, it does. It really is basic things when you look at it that way. Yeah, there's a focus and a scope. The focus is the priority, and the scope is everything that kind of is encompassed by that. But it's still important. It's not like, well, we don't care about it. It's still important. It's just not as important as the forefront, which is your focus.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said. But basically, every movement should challenge another in terms of its scope. But its kind of focus is its focus, and that's kind of sacrosanct in a way. I mean, what's the point? What's the point of trying to turn the feminist movement into a men's rights movement or something, right? So the actual kind of a challenge to their focus will be a challenge to their core identity. But to talk about their scope, which overlaps with all the scopes of the other things, then that means that you'll get an answer to what Steve Best raised in the Total Liberation talk in 2013, which is we have to accept, because we're all interested in growing the movement, but we have to accept that we're not big enough to bring about the changes that we want. Veganism, animal liberation are really big ideas, and we need as many people on board as possible. And therefore, what Best is saying is we need to forge alliances with people who have similar values to us already. And then once that happens, we'll get a situation where we can kind of interact with the other movements. We're encouraging them to be anti-speciesist. They're encouraging us to be anti-racist. Now, one interesting thing I've noticed this, Andy, is that the vegans tend to be, probably pro-feminist or anti-racist already. Yeah. And so they say, oh, well, they won't be anti-speciesist, but they expect us to be anti-racist. Well, we're already that. So in that sense, we're kind of leading by example, really, as a movement. Exactly. By saying, we've got a focus, and but we've got a scope. Now, what we want to do about your scope is to say that we need speciesism to come into your thinking, right? And so it seems to me fairly kind of straightforward. Again, it's a bit concerning that there's so much fear about something that, I mean, I've said in a couple of videos, I don't think that the problem is even there, and yet it seems to be. And then that leads to the other question about numbers. We've talked about how many animals only people are really out there. Are we talking about a vocal minority, or has there been this kind of strand in the movement all the time? It's quite interesting. I mean, people in the chat would be interesting to kind of get their views about this. What size of it? See, I was making the point that a lot of people put on their Facebook or other social media kind of profiles, they put vegans for the animals, right? Now, I don't necessarily think that means vegans for the animals only, right? I don't think it means that, because I think some people will have that as their starting point, the focus, right? You know, I mean, there was that thing that we saw on TikTok, Andy, a bodybuilder, and what do you say? There's 3 reasons for veganism, right?
Yeah,
And he
3
said,
reasons
number
to go
1,
vegan: the animals, the animals, the animals. Which,
yeah,
like I said, I don't think there'd be any disagreement from most people in that regard. It just doesn't necessarily mean. I mean, to say the animals, okay, so we don't care about the climate then? Shall I start dumping my litter in the street because I only care about the animals? Well, no, of course not. So, like, we know there's more to it, but that is the focus, yeah. And like I said, I don't think that's ever been in doubt.
I think it's
Really
a bit more nuanced than that, Andy, because there are arguments in the movement that we don't have to care about the environment. In fact, there is somebody who will argue that a YouTuber who will say that because we're vegan, we can do what we want in terms of international flights and stuff, because we've already kind of offset it all and all that kind of stuff.
No.
In terms of
but like even if we're just thinking about, again, this is kind of where the scope comes into play. Let's just say we can do the magical click our fingers, and factory farming and all animal use in circuses and zoos, all of that is done overnight. So the pollution and the water contamination and the deforestation, what are we doing about the free living beings? Because unless we address some of these problems, we're still going to make them extinct with the way that we act doing other stuff. We're going to drive more. We're going to build more technology. We're going to make more things. We're going to do all these things because we haven't understood what the problems are. We've only looked at one issue. The focus, fine, but we've completely ignored the scope.
Unless the argument is let's do one at a time.
Why? Why?
Yeah, well, quite. Yeah, but I mean,
that just seemed that if that genuinely is the argument of doing one thing at a time, then potentially there won't be a world left by the time you start thinking about the environment, and all the free living beings and other people and other animals all live in that environment. This is the environment right now outside. You don't have to be in the jungle. It's where we all live. It's where we all want to coexist together.
Yeah, you've enhanced a few Steve Best talks recently, and that's what he says is the fact that we might not have time for animal liberation.
Yeah,
if we keep fucking up the environment and the planet as we are. I mean,
I mean, fishing boats and stuff do as much damage as planes do, and all this kind of stuff. So even if we eliminated fishing, people are still going to go on cruises. People is going to just do, all of that stuff's got to be looked at. Or it might well be miles down the line in terms of the scope, but it's still there because it makes a difference. Yeah. One at a time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Veganese. I've seen you comment on a few threads, and you tend to make this point. So this is the subject of the stream, really. Is that the case? And would it be a problem if that wasn't the case? Yeah, that kind of idea. So welcome along and enjoy the journey with us. This often is another plank of the animals only argument, which is I think most people probably accept that of all the vegan social movement pioneers, Leslie Cross did most to bring about the evolution of what you might call vegan philosophy. And he did say this type of thing fairly regularly, right? He kind of like condensed veganism down. Now, he normally did this when he was talking about the focus of veganism. So I would argue that this is accurate when he talks about the focus. It's not accurate when he's talking about the scope. And we know that there's a focus and a scope with Cross is because he didn't just say this and then stop. He said a lot more after it, because it was kind of, and he often uses phrases like, what's that phrase? Great aims, or great, the second aim of veganism is this, and he's usually then talking about humans. So he normally talks about other animals first, and then humans, and says that veganism will liberate all of us. But he also does say this as well, and in fact, as we'll see in one essay, he actually shortens it even from this. So I think these are so this is a 45 idea, even before Cross was really kind of working on it. And Watson said the object of the vegan society is supposed exploitation of sentient life. And then the argument there would be: are we to say that because it was written in that day and age that sentient life meant other animals, non-human animals, or did it mean wider than that? So that's one thing. So now we seem to have gone
just while we're there though, for the interest of consistency, for everyone who says that because that meant non-human animals because of the sign of the times, also has to take into consideration then every single one of Leslie Cross's essays would have been under the understanding that humans and other animals were not biologically related. So we also need to apply that. If you want to have it there, we have to have it still with the essays too. We can't split them up and go, well, this suits and the next part doesn't. They would both have the same understanding. That's the difference. Darwinism wasn't really accepted until the 60s. It wasn't taught in schools until after that. So his understanding of the language would have been exactly the same as Donald Watson. So they have to work for both.
Yeah, you actually researched this, didn't you, Andy? You looked at when Darwinism became known, as it were, in terms of discourse, and it was at the time when Cross was writing, wasn't it?
Yeah, and afterwards, yeah. So I mean, he would have been very radical if he'd have wrote anything like that at that time. Yeah, he'd have been a pioneer in terms of Darwinism and pushing it. Yeah, which so it makes sense why he had a sort of a religious understanding. Most people did. My dad's a little, was around the same sort of time studying himself, and I've had conversations with him. And up until his teens, he was still being taught the religious way. God created everyone and everything.
Okay, so this is 45 with Watson, and then the next slide is Watson going all the way up to 2002. So the first one is 1947. Now, this is a really interesting thing. So this was a presidential address at the International Vegetarian Congress, because the vegans, although they broke away from the Vegetarian Society, they did maintain strong links, and some of them in particular, they almost like worked for both, some of them. Watson concentrated on veganism, and so did Cross, I think. But there were some other officers of the Vegan Society who were very, very linked with the vegetarians and worked with them very closely. So Watson writes, the vegan believes that if we are to be the true emancipators of animals, we must renounce absolutely our traditional and conceited attitude that we have the right to use them to serve our needs. We must supply these needs by other means. If the vegan ideal of non-exploitation were generally adopted, it would be the greatest peaceful revolution ever known, abolishing vast industries and establishing new ones in the better interests of men and animals alike. So the usual caveat is when we're quoting people from this time, they're going to be talking about men, meaning humanity. So there's always that sexist language. We can't kind of get in around that. Do you think that's just add on, though, Andy? Do you think you could see it that way if you wanted to?
Yeah, you definitely could. You'd have to think that it's quite a significant add-on. I mean, I suppose probably the way to describe it would be like this: the focus would give you 100 quid, and the add-on is going to bring you $1 million. Is it important or not? Well, yeah, you're probably going to pursue the rest of that money because there's quite a lot of it. So if it is just an add-on, then we need to encompass that it is quite a significant add-on. But also it goes to the point why I mention it then. If it's that obvious, i.e., we can't achieve this without this add-on coming, cause and reaction, you don't need to mention it, it'll happen. The fact that you're trying to encourage it means you're trying to encourage the autonomy to create it to happen, right? You're trying to encourage it, you're trying to spread it, you're trying to educate about it. If it's automatic, i.e. the liberation of non-human animals will automatically guarantee these side shoots, why mention them? Why go into the lengths to mention them over and over again?
Yes, and that is the point. It's not just kind of hidden away somewhere. It's everywhere. This stuff. I'm going to put this on a bigger screen so we can focus on that bit in the middle. Now, this is actually Watson criticizing what should we call him? Henry Salt. But then he talks about issues to do with other animals. And then he also says, now, nearly half a century later, with our increased knowledge and experience, we can see what pressing human problems are related. In other words, to the problems that they've talked about in relation to other animals, that they will be solved together or not at all. And veganism will be central to their solution. Now, that little sentence to me, right in the middle of the screen there, encompasses their belief system. They thought that veganism was so important that it's crucial for advancement in terms of animal emancipation, as they called it, and human liberation. And so everything will be solved together, or we won't do it at all. Which is a phrase that we hear and we've heard subsequently for many, many years, right? That it's all going to happen together, or we can't do it. Although then the other argument would be, well, let's try and do it brick by brick. The idea of taking a wall down brick by brick rather than trying to topple it like the Berlin Wall. So that's that one. And then if we, I'll just put this back so we can see that 2002 one on the left. Now this is where Watson, or at least because I think Cole wrote this, was saying that it's not an add-on. Donald Watson argued that the vegan movement is, quote, the greatest movement that ever was, because it's the only one now that can save mankind. So this is the Titanic and the iceberg thing, right? The lesser movements for doing good work in itself in a limited sphere are only, to use a common cliche, like the people rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. He said, helping us to guide the searchline on the iceberg, which is going to be the end of the whole show. And so, again, they're talking about the centrality of veganism to save the planet, really, and to save humanity and all the other animals. Yeah. I mean, again, this big kind of idea was being stated. I mean, it's a bit interesting, kind of using things like the Titanic and the iceberg and all that. And also, when I've used this slide in the past, I've said that you can see it as a little bit arrogant, perhaps, and certainly in terms of alliance politics. So, because it talks about all the lesser movements, they tended to think that
I suppose in that regard, although I can understand what you're saying. I suppose that just goes into what we were talking about, though. They've got no scope. They don't look at commonalities of oppression within other movements and expand in order to succeed. They're very single-minded, which will always hold them back. And that's the potential issue with the animals only motif. It will restrict all of the other problems that are interconnected, which is what exactly. I mean, it does sound arrogant, but he's not wrong.
Yeah, love, they will be sold together or not at all.
Yeah, which is not too dissimilar from Cross's, freedom only exists if everyone is free.
And then finally, you've got, and this was pretty close. Well, it was 3 years.
It's the same question and answer session.
Yeah, that's right. And we were speculating, weren't we, about this hill, because you were saying, Andy, that he went to the top of a hill. And possibly this one.
So it's somewhere in Keswick, and someone might know the name of the hill. I'm sure it was Keswick in Cumbria that he went. He visited the hill. Keswick, sorry, Keswick. To the day before he died. Yeah, I'm not sure what the name of the hill is, or whether that is where that photograph is. I don't know. I don't know that part, but it'd be interesting to know.
It would, yeah. And in fact, I tell you, who might know that would be Lee Hall, because she went and looked at his grave and the grave of Dorothy Morgan, and they found that it was kind of unmarked, which was really quite interesting. But yeah, so she looked at the the local area. In fact, she took some photographs of the graveyard, but also the surrounding area. So I bet she would know.
Yeah.
And so my greatest achievement. So that was the question he was asked. My greatest achievement question.
Are they both buried at the same place?
Sorry?
Are they both buried together? I'm guessing.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, because I've got a friend in Cumbria. I might ask if she can potentially go and take some pictures of that.
Apparently, it's very difficult to find. If you go to, it might be either the Watson time tunnel or more likely the first of the Strong Women Pioneers time tunnel, where I'm talking about Dorothy Morgan, who became Dorothy Watson.
Yeah,
it might be at the end of that one, and I think Lee Hall said that she found it difficult to find the grave.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but she did it in the end. Well, it's in succeeding, I think. Although I mustn't be the judge, in my own estimation, in achieving what I set out to do. One can hardly rise higher in one's opinion of one's life in general than to feel that I was instrumental in starting a great new movement, which could even not only change the course of things for humanity and the rest of creation, but alter man's expectation of surviving for much longer on this planet. Now, if the pioneers of our movement were animals only, why would he even say any of that?
And you can also, just to clarify the point I was making earlier, that's said in 2002, and look at his language: humanity and the rest of creation. So it's still very religious in his thinking. Like, that's still there all those years later. It's not been deconditioned down or broken down or challenged. So that's pretty normal. Yeah. But yeah, exactly that. Why go to those lengths? It would be much easier for him to just say for the animals, if that's what he thought, and that was the way he did it.
Turning veganese, yeah, the only movement for the animals, and still some people insist on making it about humans as well. You see,
apparently Donald Watson was one of them. So, you know, probably should pay attention. But like, this is the claim that constantly comes up. Who's doing that? Who's taken the priority away from the focus? It's always remained the focus, as we've just said.
No, but the problem is the argument is based on a false premise. The premise is that the movement was always just about other animals, and then we're moving the human concerns in, whereas the evidence is that those two things were interlinked right from the start. And so there's no moving, making it about humans as well. It was always about humans as well.
Yeah.
I mean, this slide.
Yeah, the evidence is on the screen. Yeah.
And then we've got the final one, which again, this comes from 2003. So the credit for this is the Donald Watson Archive. There are 3 sociologists who are working on the Donald Watson Archive, and they have access to Donald Watson's writings and his journals. He's got some brilliant nature journals. He was a real kind of nature buff, and he actually describes other animals in motion and stuff. It's very kind of detailed stuff. And there is a talk by the sociologists in vegan sociology. So if you go to vegan sociology on YouTube, I think it is, it should come up, and then you'll see the Donald Watson Archive session. But this is Watson's letter to Arthur Ling. Arthur Ling was a pioneer of plant milks, along with Leslie Cross. So he's writing in June 2003, since veganism by definition claims to help animals and people, and the Donald Watson Archive, people said that he was the one who underlined the word people. So that's not our emphasis, that was Donald Watson's emphasis. The Vegan Society must do its part in showing how to bring it about. And so in that sense, it's I suppose fairly clear. Now we move on then to the main man, we might say, Leslie Cross. So these are the source materials. So this is from a website called Candid Hominid, or it's A Candid Hominid. In fact, I think Andy, you're going to show people how to navigate this, aren't you?
Yeah. I mean, it's my script. Yeah, that one. There we go.
Yeah.
So this website is actually great. It's a great little sort of source for all sorts of things. But in terms of the Leslie Cross essays, so they're all here. It's very simple. And even I didn't know this until Roger pointed it out to me, yesterday. So I'd been doing things the hard way. Don't make the mistake that I did. If you click on, say, the HTML version of the thing, it shows you not only the number, but there's a link here in the HTML version, which I didn't have in the PDF version. So you can click that and it will take you to the actual part. So you can read all of this stuff. It's all really simple. It's all there. And I highly, highly encourage everyone to go and do just that.
Well, you say the actual part, but what the actual part of what? Need to go back to show people what that was. Because there's an archive of every...
It brings you to the pages of the vegan that are originally written.
So if you go back to let's see the front page.
Okay, hang on.
Yeah, so this is a brilliant archive.
Yeah, Issue do a really good job here, and literally you can link to the pages. It goes the whole way through. You can download these for free, very, very easily. In fact, I have every single issue. So yeah, you can. But yeah, until the other day, I didn't realize you could do the HTML thing, and I would find the page number and then go scouring through my list of PDFs to find the issue and open it that way. So don't do that. Use the HTML version. And honestly, though, I really encourage everybody to go and read them. That's the key part here. Don't worry or take our little snippet of something that we're about to talk about for granted. Go and read the entire things for yourself, or listen to my narrations of them. Like, it's less than an hour and a half, and you can listen to them all in one place. But I really encourage you to go and listen or read for yourself. It's not much to ask, really. You could do it in an evening or an afternoon, and then you'll know we're not extrapolating, or we're not cropping, or we're not taking a snippet from somewhere. You can go and read them in their entirety, and I encourage you to go and do that yourself.
Well, not only that, you've done the reading for everybody.
Well, yeah, I've narrated them, but if you want to, this is how simple it is, or you can listen to them. But yeah, I definitely encourage everybody at least once to go and take the time and do this for yourself. Don't just listen to what someone else has told you. Go and read it for yourself and see what you think. Read them in chronological order. They start from the bottom and go up. But yeah, and you'll see that all of this stuff is there.
Yeah, and this could be an advert for our show tomorrow, because not only has Andy put all this stuff together, but you've done each of Cross's essays, and then you've also done one where they're all together, so you could just
like I said, I think it's about an hour. What is it? An hour and 23 minutes or something. So less than an hour and a half, and you can listen to all the essays in one go. It's a car journey at the end of the day. A decent car journey. And
on the way to work, get a job. But also, we're updating these essays, so we're trying to bring the language up to 21st century standards, if you like, getting rid of all the man and replacing it with humanity, because we feel that these essays are so important that it would be good for people in the movement to listen to them. And, we don't want the language to kind of put them off, essentially.
Yeah.
Let's go back then to this. So these are the cross things. Now, you wanted to bring something from the very first one. So if you look back at the top there, you've got summer 1948. So again, early days. So in a sense, Andy, this is probably his first stab at it, isn't it?
Or as far as we know, yes. In terms of printed anyway, a record of, Now, there may well have been a draft version that got passed around, but it certainly never made it to print. This is, as far as we're aware, the first,
Yeah, but don't forget, this one also is part of a talk. So in some senses, it's not, because there is a difference. If you look at the archive, there's the central core, a kind of philosophical essays. And then you've got this one, which is like a transcript of a talk. And then you've got another one later in 55, which is a transcript of a talk. But then you've got some stuff
from the Vegetarian Society, so
yeah, that's right. Now, in the bit of filming that I did for your excellent film, Andy, I did say that some of the language can be a bit flowery from Cross, and this is one example of that. I think it's it can be a little bit flowery and poetic, shall we say. In the sphere of positive evidence, there are those rare but revealing glimpses of the way in which man's evolution is aided as a result of a reformed relationship with nature. Man has somehow slipped in this relationship with undesirable consequences for both nature and himself. He is out of tune with nature. He bears a relationship to her which might be likened to a geographical fault. If he could return to his rightful place, if he could approach her as a friend and a lover instead of a dissecting botanist and a murderous overlord, the resultant harmony will constitute a tremendous and incalculable evolutionary gain.
Yeah.
So a bit flowery, but I think we're starting to get.
Yeah, I mean, it is, but at the same time, it's got that charm that quite a lot of what he said. And I've made this point a few times. It's only conjecture, it's only speculation. But as a journalist in the 40s and 50s, I would imagine the opportunities he got to speak and write were all of his creative freedom. That was the opportunity that he got to be Leslie Cross, the person, not Leslie Cross, the journalist who had to uphold, the newspaper or whomever's reputation. Yeah, because you do notice that he freedomly uses his artistic license. Yeah, and I enjoy reading his stuff for exactly that reason. The Surge has definitely got a poetic-esque about it. I mean, I think if you read it and you work out the rhythm, read it again when you've got that rhythm in your head, and you'll feel that a completely different way of understanding that essay. Yeah, it does. It rolls off the tongue, and I don't think that's a mistake. But again, it goes back to this: if it's just a side effect, the resultant harmony would constitute a tremendous and incalculable evolutionary gain. He's a journalist. He knows what words are. He said that to the best of his ability in terms of, look how big this is in terms of scale. How enormous this is and life-changing for everyone. Not tiny little thing that we're just going to get anyway along the way. Who cares? Because then you don't mention it. It's by the by, but it isn't. It's his dream.
Couldn't you say that's the critique is that that's just because we'll be more civilized, and isn't that what you could say he's getting at here?
Yeah, you could, but also he later goes on to say potentially we've never had a civilization. We've never had one. So the idea is something we've never had before. So if it's just a side shoot, we're not going to get that. We're not going to have a new evolution for all humanity just off the offshoot of things, because potentially we'd have had it once upon a time, right? Before we started mass exploiting others, and we didn't. Civilization is something we've never really had. There's no recorded history of it. There's no harmony that's ever existed anywhere. There's always been oppression and death and violence. So, yeah, his dream was that would one day happen. We would be civilized. And if you want to see all of those things, the end of all the oppression everywhere across the whole planet as a side benefit, then that's fine. But I think it's a bit more significant than that.
Okay, so we're up to 54 now, so we've jumped a couple, but this is like a summary essay in a way, so that's why we've included this. And so the ones we've missed is In Search of Veganism 1 and 2 and Veganism Defined. So those are the ones we've missed if people want to.
And the new constitution, yeah.
And the new, yeah. So, and the new constitution was really written, we think, because of the fact that they had a change of rules in the movement, and so they had to mark it, I think, officially in their journal. Now, this one, I think, is the only one where he seems to talk about the scope before the focus, right? Which I've always found interesting. And when the people who are making the animals only suggestion put evidence forward, they tend not to feature this essay, and they never feature the first sentence because it goes against what they mean. This is an attempt to state in simple terms what veganism is and why and how it came into existence, and to suggest what it could mean for mankind. And then we get this kind of interesting thing about the definition of the scope again. The word veganism is a symbol that stands for a major change, a new mutation, comparable to the freeing of the serfs and the freeing of the slaves. And then here he says something really interesting. Its official definition, and here he actually slims it down even from what it was before, the doctrine that man should live without exploiting animals, is accurate, precise, and comprehensive, but not always fully understood. This is not as surprising as it might seem, for rarely have 9 short words enshrined a reform so massive, the achievement of which would bring a new world and new men to inhabit it. So it seems to me that just that bit alone should be enough to allay the fears of the animals only people, because it's not saying anything about human issues are going to be taking over or anything like that, but it is saying that if we look at it in its grand scheme of things from that original kind of slimmed down definition, then we're going to end up with something really magnificent, because they really were very, very hopeful for humanity. They wanted to save humanity. They said it over and over. They wanted to
I mean, one of the things we haven't touched on yet that we supposedly should have was the timing of this. I mean, many of them, Watson included, had lost friends during the war. They'd lived through 2 world wars. At this time, I mean, we live in an age now where if there's an incident in somewhere tomorrow, then the next day we've got the news footage, we've got camera footage. This didn't used to happen in the 40s and 50s. During the mid-50s, this is when the stories of the Holocaust survivors were coming out and being talked about. This was all fresh. The human element was absolutely there. You can't ignore it. It's easy for us to ignore it now, but this was their life. It really was.
Yeah, product of their time. It's hard to kind of overestimate that, because it's such a crucial point, the fact that they were living through such a terrible part of human history. Not that there've not been others, of course, but for them to kind of like start their version and a more radical version of the peace movement. I mean, they saw veganism as part of the peace movement, but it was a more radical version of the peace movement than ever existed, because it included other animals as well. So again, as Colleen said before, they were true visionaries.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they were.
And then the final bit is interesting. Why do we believe we should live without exploiting animals? To put the question in another form, why was such a doctrine formulated? So it's almost like a recipe, it seems to me. The final, if not immediate answer, is a revealing one, for it demonstrates the truth of the claim that veganism is not a mere side shoot in human evolution, but a central extending growth of considerable significance. Veganism owes its birth to the fact that at its deepest point within us, we believe impregnably in freedom. I'm not going to read that last line because it's not needed. In fact, I think we might have got rid of that line from our update, I think. But again, the interesting part of it for me is this kind of like almost like condensing veganism down to those 9 words and then expanding it. Now, the reason we know there's this focus and scope is because they didn't stop. I mean, if you were to think that all they were writing about was the focus and then they said that's veganism, these essays would be a page long.
Yeah, absolutely. And there'd only be the need for 1 or 2. He'd laid it out and then maybe reiterated it a few years later. There's no need to go into the scope. It's a pretty simple concept if it's a animals only movement and there's nothing else there.
Okay. There seems to be some arguments in the chat with turning veganism, and kind of fair play, really, for coming into, in a sense, the lion's den on that. Okay, so this is dropping back to 51.
Yeah.
And so this is when there was a new rule. So I don't think we're going to be reading this out particularly, but this is where I was struggling to find the words that he used, and he talked about broad aspects of veganism, and he did this in 2 essays. And I think the next slide is the other one, I think. And so you could basically say that the first paragraph is the focus, and the second paragraph is the scope. Okay, and he calls it the broad aspects of veganism. And then he says in, I think the next one coming up, that there's some parts of veganism which are obvious, and then there's some parts which are not obvious. And he kind of said that at least twice, I think, in his essays. And you'll probably know more than me, having read them up recently.
Yeah.
But basically, he's going through, well, the thing, again, this is very focused because there's no doubt about it. This guy is a right candidate. You see the end of the use of the minerals across the board. We can't use them for food, commodities, for working, hunting, fishing, all the other uses involve exploitation, right? That's going to be abolished. And he says, by looking at it this way, the society has clearly come out on the side of the liberators. We're not so much welfare that we seek, but as freedom. So they're laying it out as an abolitionist thing straight off. I think it's our aim is not to make the present relationship between man and animal, which, if honestly viewed, is mostly one of master and slave, more tolerable, but to abolish it and replace it by something more worthy of man's high estate. Now, that phrase in itself is quite telling, I think, Andy. I mean, why would he bother saying man's high estate if he didn't care about humanity? Right? He's basically saying that we've hit a moral low and we've got to drag us back out of it, you know? And, you know, they all seem to be saying that kind of thing. Okay, and then the second broad aspect is of the vegan aim is its effect on human evolution. So these, I've always said in my kind of presentations that these same themes are rehearsed over and over and over again, whether we talk about Watson, whether we talk about Cross and some others, as we'll see. Not doing very well keeping less than an hour.
Yeah, I noticed that.
I know. Yeah, we were hoping to create this as a kind of, oh well, if you want to see the argument about this, go here, and we were going to do it in 45 minutes. Yeah, big chance of that. The only thing here is the I think the master and slave thing is interesting. He said the greatest and deepest harm is suffered not by the slave but by the master. Now, I think he was talking about moral harm there. He thinks that we as a species are harming ourselves morally.
Yeah.
You know, because they talked about our lower nature, they talked about our barbarity, our savagery and all that kind of stuff. And they're basically saying we've kind of got a choice. We can either be like that or we can get ourselves out of this trough, right? And if we want to get out of this trough, guess what? Veganism is going to be a major part of how to do it.
Yeah, at the end, it's the kind of early stages of speciesism, isn't it? And he mentioned it in the one we looked at earlier, Man and Nature too, where it's like there's the commonalities there, and you can't see past it. If we want, say, freedom or liberation or whatever for human beings, we have to understand that has to extend. Otherwise, those are just words. They're not concepts. They're words. They're ideas. But we can't ever attain them, because unless they exist for everyone, everywhere, they are just an illusion at the end of the day. They're just privileges for certain people. And he alludes to that a couple of times. But again, why bother? It's much simpler for him to just say, well, none of that matters. This is what the movement's about. This is what we stand for. Here's my essay. Here's my point. Never have to change from it. Those 9 words, basically, that's all you have to put out. That's the press release.
I haven't really had time to check the chat too much, but there's been quite a discussion about the issue, and Colleen's kind of it seems that Turning Veganism said that they don't care about humanity. So
I mean, I'm not going to make this criticism, but I do find that most of the time the people that have this animals only impression are misanthropes, and that's the problem. They're still speciesist towards humanity, which is why they can't bear to include them. It's a personal issue almost all the time.
Yeah, and let's face it, kind of naming names. I mean, this is the origins of this is Urowski.
Yeah.
And so, and that's why some people will say with a straight face that Urowski started the vegan movement, because as far as they're concerned, the vegan movement didn't exist until Urowski, who told them that humans are a pestilence, that, that we're a cancer, and that the best thing for the planet would be for us to be wiped out. And whatever you might think of that argument, and there are pros and cons to it, because, I mean, just look at what humans do. But we are a social movement. This is what's lost also, I think, in the animals only thing. We're a social justice movement made up of human beings. So people say it's the animals movement. It's not the animals movement. The other animals they haven't created a social movement. They haven't created a social movement organization, as far as we know, unless there's one underground in the worm community or somewhere. And I'm not ruling out that possibility. But in terms of the vegan social movement as we understand it, who might be turning up at London for a march or doing whatever you like, or celebrating World Vegan Month or World Vegan Day, those are humans who are the organizers of a social justice movement. So the other animals are the subject of this movement. They don't organize it themselves. I mean, we might argue that it'd be better off if they did, but but they don't, right?
They wouldn't get all the nuance and the politics in it if they did.
Yeah. This is 54. Is that 54? That might be wrong, actually. I'm not quite sure. Is that right? 54 on this one? Or is this 51 still? Oh, no, this is the bottom of...
Yeah, no, this is Surge,
yeah. Okay, so this is 54, right. Okay, so this is where, again, he starts talking about the stuff that is obvious and some of the stuff that are not. Some of the changes in daily life, is the third line down, are obvious. There will be, for example, be no butcher's shops, and the milkman, if he still goes his rounds, will be delivering vegan milk. And that was interesting at the time, because they were already in the process of creating vegan milk, And then this modern day thing, the countryside will not be heavy with the anguish of cows crying for their calves, which sounds like a modern day thing, but they were talking about it way back then. No slaughterhouses, no laboratories, no one will be hunting for fun or anything else, really, I suppose. And then he does the same thing where he goes, okay, that's the obvious stuff. Some of the changes are not so obvious. And then he talks about the benefit to humanity again. So it's always the same thing. This is what the focus is all about. And then this is what the scope is all about. Put that together, and we've got human and other animal liberation.
Yeah.
And he says right at the end of this one, which is quite nice, is that we are the pioneers. Still saw themselves as the pioneers. And I think that we're still really kind of at the end of the pioneer stage of the movement. It's not a very old movement, really, and so, yeah.
I think the last part of the second paragraph is really poignant as well, because it kind of defines what we're talking about right now. Benefits which today, by his own short-sighted violation, he denies himself. Yep.
Yes,
because that's the problem. Right.
Yeah,
it's not the text, is it? It's not the movement. It's personal people's opinions. That's the real problem. The denial there comes from individuals.
Okay, so we did come up with an argument against ourselves at this point, and that was, do you think this is just marketing? And they're basically saying to non-vegans, go vegan and you will benefit as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something we can completely rule out. It would just make very little sense when you consider everything else that was said, and it would kind of go against the grain a little bit. But it's not impossible, I suppose, if someone wants to make that allegation about it. But I would essentially say no.
Yes, and I think
we have to take the consideration of the time again. You know, these are people that have gone through two absolutely destructive, atrocious events where they've lost people they know, and the world is still recovering from it. It's very easy for us now. It's kind of privilege for us, a lot of us, to talk about those things. We haven't got any understanding, but they were living through those things.
They were. I got a sick cat.
Oh no.
Yeah, I think it would be an unkind reading if you think in terms of reading all of their work.
I think it would go against who Cross was as a person too. Personally, I think even if someone pulled him aside and said, "Can you put a bit of marketing spin in there?" I don't think he'd want to. Like I said, I get the impression, and again, it's just my opinion, but I get the impression with these essays, especially this one, that's his artistic freedom. I can write what I want about what I want finally, and this is my passion that I am really, dedicated to. Yeah, that's the impression I get from it. I don't get it. It's like there isn't any added to it. This is what he wanted to say. That's why I think it's important to sort of look at the words he used. He knew language really well. If he tells you that something's incalculable, it means it's going to be bigger than he can write on the piece of paper. It doesn't mean some side benefit that we might get.
Yeah, and he uses that phrase. Okay, this is again unkind. I don't think this has been saying. I often say that that when we're talking about the pioneers or the founders of our movement, that their views are not set in stone, and that we expect evolution. In fact, that one thing that sociologists talk about social movements is that they move. And so you expect evolution, but the evolution has to be a kind of evolution that is built on the original values. And unless the argument is that all those original values in those years were rubbish, we need to start again. So, and so in that sense, I do get the feeling sometimes that some people have almost like joined the wrong movement. They don't really like this one, and so they want to say that it's not like this, or they want to say that this all ought to be ripped apart and we need to start again, afresh. I think there might be something like that. Okay, then this is the last one, I think, of Cross. So this is 55 now. I think we wanted to say that this is an interesting summary, but this is a transcript. He's talking to the Hastings and St. Leonard's branch of the Sussex Vegetarian Society in 1955. So a lot of people point out that he focused a lot on the focus here. Well, yeah. I mean, he was trying to convince vegetarians to live and be vegan, yeah. And so you probably would, in that sense. This wasn't a philosophical essay. This was a talk, and this is a transcript of a talk. So I think that makes it different in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You're aware of your audience, aren't you, or who you're engaging with. So yeah, I mean, in fact, a perfect kind of recent example of that is, why does everyone think that Joey Carbstrong had the B stats to hand when he went on Piers Morgan's show? Do you think he might have had an inkling what Piers might have said? because he knew who his audience was. He didn't take a random guess, did he? He kind of organized himself in expectance of what he was going to get. And that's what people do. You know, we've got to expect that with the people he's speaking to. He's not going to go in there and go into the full detail. He's going to try and get them to accept the focus rather than the scope, which makes sense, right? It does make a lot of sense. You would. Because they're already on board with a part of it, right? In your mind, anyway. They're already on part with some of it. So you're going to focus on that because you want them to understand. Yeah.
Well, one thing that we can pat ourselves on the back about, Andy, is the fact that most of the things that Turning Veganism said is what we said they say. In that sense, it was kind of accurate in that way. So these are we're getting to the end really now, and so this is where we're moving into the 60s and to the 80s. The date on the Kath Clements one is 1995, but that was the second edition. So the first edition is 1985. Yeah. Whether this quote is in the 85 one, I'm not sure, because I don't think I've ever seen it.
I don't know the answer either. I'm not sure.
No. Okay.
No idea.
Well,
if someone knows the answer to that, it'd be interesting to know whether it was, but it's not something I know the answer to. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this again is now this is interesting, really, because I think if we were to rewrite this one, we'd alter it a little bit, I think, Andy. So veganism is one thing and one thing only: a way of living which avoids exploitation. We might be putting in the word oppression as well, of course. Whether that be of our fellow men, the animal population, or the soil upon which we rely for our very existence. Just a little note about the last bit is that a lot of the pioneers were very concerned about the quality of the soil. And so quite a lot of them talked about it. Faye Henderson talked about it as well. I think Kathleen Janaway talked about it a lot too. So they were very concerned about soil quality. So I think they realized that that small layer of topsoil is what we rely on for survival.
Yeah, and obviously, again, as a sort of going back to the sign of the times thing, the idea of vertical farming or anything like that was so far beyond comprehension that the soil was everything, right? It was whether you did eat or not. So yeah, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely with that one. And then veganism is about, so in terms of the rearrangement, I would see if I was editing that, I'd put the animal thing first. It's like I was saying, I've got a Vegan Society mug where it's got animals, people, and the planet, but I think it says people, animals, and the planet, I think. And so I would always arrange it with the focus first. Which is why I always point out that the surge is interesting, because that's the only one that doesn't do that.
Yeah.
It goes the other way around. And then Kath Clements, which is like a summary, really, of a book. It is like the end of kind of the opening chapter. Veganism is about having a consistent approach to human rights and animal rights, ecology, and world food problems. So environmental issues and food scarcity problems, we call it nowadays. Again, I would flip that around and put animal rights and human rights. Now, of course, what could be going on here is what happened to Reagan, was the fact that they were writing carefully in order to keep an audience in a way, and not just be laughed out of court, as it were. And that went on right up until the start of the 80s with Tom Reagan and the case for animal rights.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's a question of us just putting ourselves in their place, because in the 70s and 80s, everyone laughed at the idea of animal rights and animal liberation. And so, you had to word it. You can, going back to what you were saying, and factoring all that Darwin stuff, it was even more complicated for Cross writing in the 50s.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Because like I said, even if there was a case where he was ahead of his time and he was sort of like, well, I've just read this book, I've read The Origin of Species, I'm ahead of science, so to speak. It would have been seen as so radical to talk like that. Yeah, far more probably radical, because veganism would have been already turning some heads. And if he was started factoring in, oh, by the way, did you know we were all animals? Yeah, I think they'd have kind of completely disregarded everything he had to say. Yeah, because he would have been up against religion then all the time. Veganism wasn't really opposing religion, really, was it? Because lots of religions like to profess that they already held some of these core beliefs and principles. Whereas, yeah, absolutely, science does oppose religion. So, yeah, I think he would have definitely got some serious pushback for that, and it would have been seen as very, very radical in the 50s to say that.
Right, I'm looking for where Kathleen Janaway has gone, and I realised that I deleted it myself. So I'll get that back again. So I'm not quite sure. Are we at the end of this? Oh, I think that's the last slide, I think. Okay, so I need to get the
Yeah, that's the last slide. It's just a video now, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
If you haven't got it, I can grab it.
Yeah, I got it here. It's just that I right, where did I download it to? Yeah, I went and deleted it for some unknown reason without thinking.
That's fine.
Here we are. Okay. I say, right. Okay. Be with you in a minute, folks. This is right. Here we go. Share screen. Facebook. No, it's the wrong one. Okay.
Just checking out with the chat. Eva's poetry is fantastic, and she also reiterates quite a lot of her feelings throughout it. She was a sort of a big contributor to Vegan News. So, yeah, her thoughts are consistent even with her own poetry. And as a poet, I know that you wrote sort of what you really care about. That you don't alter it. That's your heart, so to speak, that speaks then. So yeah, I think she's consistent the whole way through. And there's been some suggestion that she was just this woman that said a thing, and I just think that's ridiculous, to be honest. The more I learn about her, the more I realize how much of an impact that she had and how huge she was. Quite the opposite.
Yeah, I think she worked for the Vegan Society for years and years as well, didn't she?
Pretty much the whole of her existence from the time of going vegan, she was involved, yeah, some way, somehow. And she ran the boutique that whole time as well, I think.
Oh yeah, the vegan kind of bed and breakfast or something.
Yeah, it was a shop, I think. I think it sold like clothes and food and all sorts.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
I think it was called the Vegan Boutique. There's an advert for it in every single one of the magazines at the back. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's where connections and friends come in, folks.
Yeah, I think it was like an old-fashioned everything under one roof shop, because it talks about food and clothes and all sorts. Yeah, so I would imagine that was where you would go.
Right, let's see if we can get away with putting it like that. Okay, so this is Kathleen Janaway. So this is the 1990s by this stage, even though it looks a little bit more dated than that in a way. But she's saying very similar kind of things. Let's see if we can.
Yeah, even enhanced, it still looks really dated, don't it?
I say without hesitation that I think accelerating a trend to veganism is the most important thing we can do today to save all highly developed forms of life on this planet. We live at a momentous time, at what could be a terrific turning point in evolution. Nothing, to my mind, can exaggerate the importance of veganism. But the general picture now, I'm quite sure, is that the age of predatory man is coming. Will a new age, in accordance with the teachings of the great, follow, or will we go right down? Right next, and if we can solve this problem of animal exploitation and spread veganism, we should also solve the problems of war and poverty and all the other things that has caused immense suffering to people and animals through the ages. Veganism is as important as that. It's a terrible responsibility.
So concerned about war and poverty. So that presumably is the other animals who are poor and the other animals who are at war with each other, presumably.
Yeah. The Great War of Foxes versus Badgers from 1582. You remember it? Yeah. I mean,
I do. Yeah. I wasn't around at the time, but
but it just shows, doesn't it? And again, this is a long time afterwards. If she didn't agree with the philosophy, she'd say something different. She'd say, well, this is what they used to say, and actually I think it's just about this.
You wanted to make a point about that, didn't you? About the fact that a lot of them were writing about what others have said in the past after they died, and they were still completely on board with what they said.
I think the most telling of all of those is the Donald Watson conversation with George Roger, where it's 2002, and I suppose the letter to Arthur Ling, where he could say whatever he wants, right? He can say whatever he wants. There's no one saying you better stick with this. And you know, talking of Leslie Cross, for example, he'd been no longer with us for a significant amount of time. If Donald disagreed with his views and his philosophy, he could have said, well, actually, you know, at the time I never said anything, but now with hindsight, this is how I feel. And there'd have been nothing wrong with that, right? And he didn't do any of those things. He is still consistent. So I think we have to take that. We have to take that into consideration in exactly the same way that if what Eva Back was saying, nobody else agreed with, why didn't they say? Why did she have the positions that she held? Why didn't anyone challenge it? Why did they just accept it and repeat it year after year? Because that's not what happens now, is it?
you don't say. It's because there is a suggestion from these kind of like kind of health, plant-based health people, and I think vitamin sellers, I think they are, that there was a big war between Watson and Cross, and that Cross had kind of thrown Watson out. He was a militant animal liberationist, whereas Watson was only concerned about health and diet and stuff. And if that was true, once Cross had died, you know, Watson was at liberty to say all that. Well,
absolutely, yeah. And I mean, even if because I've seen the same things, but even if all those allegations are true, it still doesn't change anything about the animals, including humans' position, so to speak, because the accusation is that Cross was the animal liberationist and Watson was just interested in diet, right? Well, that doesn't check. Well, we'll look at the things that we've just shown you that Watson said himself. So what was the suggestion then? That Cross was in the background going, you better make sure you talk about this. No, why would he? If they disagree, they disagree. They're saying the same things. So it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it wouldn't change the position. One of those
hostage situations. If Watson was making a video, there'd be like a gun just here.
Yeah. And then you've got Leslie Cross, the pacifist, who would have been like, I'm not going to hurt you, but I'm just going to tell you that I'm wrong. Yeah.
I'll give you a Chinese burn. So there's a bit of a warning for you here, Andy.
Sorry. Yeah, dangerous stuff.
Yeah, such logic and common sense. Yeah, it's too logical, mate. So okay, so I guess we're at the end.
I think we've covered everything that we wanted. You know, we were worried whether things would come up, but they have done. All the things we wanted to talk about been covered. So
yeah,
good.
I mean, in summary. For the people who are animals only, I think that their fears have got no kind of foundation really. I don't think what they say is happening to the movement or will happen to the movement. Well, first of all, there's no evidence that it's ever happened, and there's no movement towards making it happen.
No.
So the idea of watering it down, which is a phrase that I saw being used in the chat, that's not happening.
No, if anything, you could argue the point that it strengthens the message because it says that we are all one. It doesn't split us into two groups, humans and non-humans, which encourages speciesism and is part of the problem. It says we're all one. So it actually strengthens the message. But just before we finish as well, there is a serious issue that is diluting our movement that a lot of people don't want to talk about, and that's welfareism. And I've noticed that every time that I have these conversations with the animals only people, welfareism doesn't matter. That's not a problem. Even though it seriously is a problem that's absolutely right throughout the movement, that there's no effort being paid. I mean, even us doing this video is more effort than this subject needs to be. We could be spending it in other places, but it's needed because of the viewpoint that's held. Whereas if we were putting our attention to stop this reducitarian, flexitarian, welfareism crap, we could actually do something. But we're being diversified into other arguments again and other nuances that are a waste of everybody's time, because it is.
Yeah, and it is interesting, that, isn't it? The fact that you've said, well, look, welfare isn't the problem. Look at what this person is saying. These reducitarians, these people saying that vegans should start eating other animals again, and blah blah blah. These are people who have got videos and books, and you're pointing to them, and they kind of go, oh, well, that's not really a problem. What the problem is this, and you go,
yeah.
well,
What the problem is one person in a WhatsApp group chat or on a Facebook status from 2006 that said, I'm supporting humans first. One individual, and that is what we're talking about. Like, show me the evidence of everyone who includes humanity prioritizing humanity, and if you can't, then there isn't any. That's the end of the issue, really. Unless you can show evidence that this is a problem, there isn't one. You're creating a problem by making it an issue, by causing that division.
Yeah, I think the reason that we're a bit narky about this, let's put it this way, is the fact that when the animals only people talk to others, they will tell them what we are about.
We've already had it in this comment section, that this must be your position then. I mean, the first comment was something along the lines of, what hope have the animals got? Why? Who's disregarded them? Because that's what you're insinuating that we're doing. How? And where's the evidence of this? That's my point. If you haven't got any evidence that anyone's doing this, then what is the issue that you're so scared of happening? And why are you ignoring the serious issue of welfareism?
Okay, so see, this is what we're trying to get at. We're not disputing that this is not true, but who are we talking about here? You've heard vegans or alleged vegans say, I'm vegan, but humanity first. I've never heard, I've been vegan for 44 years. I've never heard a single vegan say this. Not once.
But even if we're talking, again, we're talking about individual cases, which, and again, we would be saying, well, that's not the case. So I don't even know what the issue is, because we wouldn't even be in agreement with that position. So even if you've managed to find an individual example, and they're going to be few and far between, we don't even hold that position. So I'm not sure what the fear is. It's not the movement being taken over by this, is it?
What about the I support local farmers thing? Because that seems a lot more nuanced to me. I mean, what does that even mean?
I don't know, because I've that's the sort of thing that I hear from non-vegans. I support local farmers. That's normally an argument as in, well, I know where my meat comes from. So I don't know, but these aren't things that I hear from vegans.
I mean, vegans support local farmers if they happen to be.
Yeah, if they're vegan friendly, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, what would be the opposite? Support Tesco instead? I don't really understand.
No, well, I mean, it's interesting because I think the first bit is a strong allegation, but we don't have any. We don't have any evidence, and we've asked for it. We've said, okay, who are these people? Give us their names. Where? We were told recently there was a WhatsApp conversation. We weren't given any details about it, and we weren't told how many people were in it, and all this kind of stuff. And so, I would have thought that most of us in the chat, being regulars online, regulars in terms of activism, would have bumped into people like this if they exist.
Well, I've held this position for about 5 years now, and it's only the last 6 months or so that I've started seeing this thing repeated regularly. So yeah, where are these people?
And also, who's going to take any notice of people who say that anyway?
Well, we wouldn't. That's the point. So
no.
I don't know.
No, that's interesting. And just as on a lighter thing about language, Colleen is saying they're fighting bogeymen or boogeymen. So that's
I'll say this so that you don't get in any trouble, but I say this with all sincerity. Tobias Lienhardt is a bigger threat to our movement than any of the allegations that I've seen from the animals only people. You want to see a problem? There's one.
You having a go at my friend
Yeah, I am.
Tobias?
Yeah, I am. That's a bigger problem for our movement to achieve what we want to achieve. That's a bigger problem, yeah. Because if
You
you're
never
concerned
leave
as
that poor
animals
lad alone,
only,
do you?
Tobias's ethos is that we can still use them in a kind way. I think you should have a problem with that. That should be where you should be putting your attention then. Because he's trying to encourage that reducitarianism and ethical use is okay. Well, obviously, we don't agree with that.
Yeah, well, let me join in on this and get myself into trouble, because we're not talking about something that's happening a long way away or a long time ago. Leonard's organization has just funded an academic conference, right? Which meant that because they were funders, along with Mercy for Animals, who just spent 25 million plus on welfare campaigns, because they were funders, they were allowed to give their corporate demonstrations and presentations and everything. And essentially, Leonard was the keynote speech at the end of the conference. And he spent that speech talking about all the 10 things that he changed his mind about veganism, which is that we should talk about veganism, quite often. No, we shouldn't do that. And the one that shocks most people is the fact that he argues for a symbiotic relationship with other animals. So we can get wool from them, we can get manure from them, we can get eggs from them, and we give them in return, shelter and food and this kind of stuff.
It's the backyard egg argument, isn't it? At the end of the day, they pay rent with eggs.
Yeah,
that's essentially what he's suggesting. Yeah,
it's but you see, in terms of the threat to our movement, and we are concerned about our movement, obviously, that's the threat, not the alleged bringing humans into a movement that's already concerned about humans. But again, it doesn't mean that everybody's got to join Amnesty International or anything. It doesn't mean that. That's not what's being meant here. And if I suppose to end, I would, if people want to say, well, let's say we should say animals first as a slogan, I'd probably go along with that. Would you go along with that, Andy?
Yeah. Like I said, I don't think the focus is in question. I don't think I don't think it is. And if there was some sort of relabeling or rebranding to kind of reprioritize the focus to make people feel better about the fact that there was a scope, whatever, fine. It doesn't change the focus. It doesn't change anything. So yeah, fine. As long as we start potentially having this nuanced argument that doesn't benefit anyone or save anything, it's just a total waste of energy, isn't it? Really, that would be better spent elsewhere.
If it would like calm them down and give them some comfort, then we could go for the animals first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of thing, and I'd be okay with that, I'm sure, and I'm sure most others would be, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, folks, this was a bit of a strange one. Now, there is a special time tunnel coming up next Tuesday, along with Still Alive. So we're doing a joint thing for a special reason, and we'll tell you all about that on the day. So hopefully we'll see you next Tuesday. Tomorrow, we've got the end of the updating of our first essay, which again is the surge of freedom, right? And so we've got about a page to do, so that only take us about 3 hours.
We're starting just for anyone. We're starting at 7 as well tomorrow, rather than 8, just in case.
Yeah, 7. Yeah, give us a bit of time. Yeah, that's right. It was. To be honest, though, Andy, it was a lot. It took a lot longer than I expected.
There's a lot in there, especially when you're looking at individual words and things like that. Yeah, it took time, and obviously we're interacting with the chat as well and waiting for them to respond. And so yeah, I didn't expect it to take as long as it did, but I thought it'd be about 2.5 hours to do the whole essay, and it's going to be more like 3.5, isn't it?
Yeah, it's ridiculous, isn't it? We just got to learn to do things faster, I'm afraid. Okay, people, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again real soon.